Imagine a billionaire CEO with the world at his feet, frozen in place as he sees twins who are his spitting image. In the arms of the ex-wife he thought he'd lost forever. Behind the luxury facades and rehearsed smiles, there was a decade of hidden pain, secrets never spoken, and a love that never died. This isn't just a story. It's a reminder of the invisible bonds that unite us. Stay with me. What comes next might heal your heart or reveal truths you've buried, because sometimes fate doesn't offer us second chances. Sometimes it gives us a revelation so shocking it rewrites our entire history. Alexander Hayes had everything. At 42, he commanded a tech empire valued in the billions. His name opened doors anywhere in the world. His signature moved markets. His decisions shaped the future of thousands of employees and millions of users. But on that autumn morning in Manhattan, as he crossed Fifth Avenue on his way to yet another investor meeting, Alexander Hayes felt like a man with nothing. The glass towers surrounding him reflected a success he'd built with his own hands, but they couldn't reflect what he'd lost along the way. 10 years. It had been 10 years since he'd signed the divorce papers that tore his world in half. 10 years since he'd watched Emma walk out of his life, her eyes red from crying, her voice barely a whisper as she said goodbye. He told himself he'd moved on. He told himself that building his empire was enough, that success could fill the void she left behind. He was wrong. That morning started like any other. Alexander's driver dropped him off at the corner of 5th and 57th. He preferred to walk the last few blocks to his office, a ritual that gave him time to think, to prepare for the battles of the boardroom. The October air was crisp, leaves falling from the trees that lined the avenue. People rushed past him, caught up in their own worlds, their own struggles, their own dreams. None of them knew who he was. In this moment he was just another face in the crowd, and there was something liberating about that anonymity. He adjusted his Tom Ford suit jacket, checked his Patek Philippe watch, 8:47 a.m., and quickened his pace. The meeting was at 9 sharp, and Alexander Hayes was never late. But then he saw her. Across the street, standing outside a small cafe he'd never noticed before, was Emma. His Emma. The woman he'd loved with every fiber of his being. The woman he'd failed. The woman who haunted his dreams even after all these years. Time seemed to stop. The noise of the city faded into a distant hum. His heart, which had beaten steadily through billion-dollar deals and high-stakes negotiations, now hammered against his ribcage like it was trying to escape. She looked different, yet exactly the same. Her chestnut hair was longer now, falling in waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple cream sweater and jeans, nothing like the designer clothes he used to buy her. But her smile, that radiant, genuine smile that had first captured his heart 15 years ago, was unchanged. She was laughing at something, her eyes bright with joy, and Alexander felt a sharp pain in his chest. When was the last time he'd seen her truly happy? Certainly not in those final years of their marriage, when his obsession with work had slowly poisoned everything beautiful between them. Then he saw them, 2 boys, no more than 9 years old, standing on either side of her, identical twins. They were holding ice cream cones, giggling about something only children find hilarious, and as one of them turned to look up at Emma, Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The boy had his eyes, not just the same color, that distinctive combination of gray and green that Alexander had inherited from his own father, but the exact same shape, the same intensity, the same way of looking at the world with curiosity and determination. The other twin turned then, and Alexander saw his own jawline, his own nose, his own ears. These weren't just children who resembled him. These were his children, his sons, sons he never knew existed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees weakened. He reached out to steady himself against a lamppost, his expensive Italian leather briefcase falling to the sidewalk with a thud. A passerby asked if he was okay, but Alexander couldn't form words. He could only stare across the street at the family he never knew he had. The family Emma had built without him. Questions exploded in his mind like fireworks. When did she find out she was pregnant? Was it before the divorce or after? Why didn't she tell him? How could she keep this from him for nearly a decade? But beneath the shock and the questions, there was something else, a flood of emotions he'd kept locked away for 10 years. Regret, longing, love. A desperate, aching love that had never really gone away, no matter how many deals he closed or companies he acquired. Emma hadn't seen him yet. She was too focused on her sons, wiping ice cream from one boy's cheek, laughing as the other tried to catch a falling leaf. She looked content, complete. Had she moved on? Was there someone else in her life? Another man playing father to his children? The thought made Alexander's stomach turn. He wanted to run across the street to demand answers, to hold those boys and tell them he was their father. But his feet wouldn't move. Because what right did he have? He was the one who'd chosen conference calls over dinner conversations. He was the one who'd missed anniversaries and forgotten birthdays. He was the one who'd let ambition blind him to what really mattered. Emma had begged him to slow down, to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. She'd cried herself to sleep more nights than he could count, and he'd pretended not to notice, because acknowledging her pain would mean confronting his own failures. One of the twins suddenly looked across the street, directly at Alexander. For a moment their eyes met, and Alexander felt a connection so powerful it nearly brought him to tears. Did the boy feel it too? Could children sense these things, these invisible threads that bind us to the people we're meant to love? The boy tugged on Emma's sleeve, pointing in Alexander's direction. Emma turned, and their eyes locked across the chaos of Fifth Avenue. The color drained from her face. Her smile vanished. For 3 heartbeats, they simply stared at each other, separated by traffic and time and all the words they'd never said. Then Emma grabbed both boys by the hand and quickly led them into the cafe, disappearing from view. And Alexander stood there, a billionaire CEO reduced to a broken man on a street corner, finally understanding that he'd spent 10 years building an empire while losing a kingdom. Alexander didn't go to his meeting. For the first time in his professional life, he simply didn't show up. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. His assistant, the board members, investors who'd flown in from Tokyo just for this presentation. He ignored them all. Instead, he found himself sitting on a bench in Central Park, staring at the lake without really seeing it. His mind was replaying that moment over and over, like a film stuck on loop. Those boys, his boys, their laughter, their innocence, the way they looked at Emma with pure, unconditional love. He'd missed everything. First steps, first words, first days of school, birthday parties and scraped knees and bedtime stories. 9 years of memories that belonged to him but had been lived without him. The weight of that loss pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. He thought back to the last months of his marriage. Emma had been different then, he realized now. More emotional, more desperate for his attention. There were moments when she'd looked at him with something in her eyes. Was it hope? Fear? Had she been trying to tell him something? He remembered one night in particular, about 2 weeks before she'd asked for the divorce. They were in bed, the silence between them heavy and uncomfortable. Emma had turned to him, her hand reaching for his, and she'd said, "Alex, we need to talk. There's something important I need to tell you." But his phone had rung, a call from Singapore, a deal that was falling apart. He'd taken the call. He'd always taken the call, and Emma had rolled over, turning her back to him, her shoulders shaking in a way that told him she was crying. He'd told himself he'd talk to her in the morning. But morning came, and there was an emergency at the office, and then another crisis, and another. There was always something more urgent than his wife's tears. Had she been trying to tell him about the pregnancy that night? The thought made him sick. What kind of man had he become that his own wife couldn't tell him she was carrying his children? He pulled out his phone and opened Instagram, something he rarely did. He typed Emma's name into the search bar with trembling fingers. There she was, Emma Chen Hayes. She'd kept his last name. Why had she kept his name if she'd hidden his children from him? Her profile was private, but her picture was visible. It was a photo of her with the twins, all 3 of them laughing, covered in what looked like finger paint. The caption read, "My whole world." The post was from 3 weeks ago and had 247 likes. Alexander stared at that photo until his vision blurred. She'd built a whole life, documented it, shared it with hundreds of people, and he'd known nothing about it. He called his private investigator, a man he'd used for business due diligence over the years. "Marcus, I need you to find out everything about Emma Hayes. Where she lives, where she works, everything about her life for the past 10 years. And I need it today. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, raw, desperate, nothing like the controlled tone he used in boardrooms. Marcus asked no questions, just promised to have preliminary information within hours. Alexander hung up and sat back on the bench. Was this wrong? Was he crossing a line? But how could it be wrong to want to know about his own children? Except they weren't really his, were they? Not in any way that mattered. He hadn't earned that title. Biology didn't make you a father. Presence did. Love did. Sacrifice did. And he'd been absent for every single moment of their lives. His phone rang again. This time it was his brother, David. "Alex, where the hell are you? The Japanese investors are furious. They're threatening to pull out. Your assistant is having a panic attack. What's going on?" Alexander closed his eyes. Just this morning, this call would have sent him racing back to the office. The Japanese deal was worth $800 million. But now? "Tell them I'm sorry, David. Tell them there's a family emergency." There was a long pause. "Family emergency? Alex, you don't have family. Not since the divorce. What's really going on?" The words stung because they were true. He'd isolated himself so completely after Emma left that even his own brother didn't consider him to have a family. "I do have family, David. I just found out I have sons, twin boys, 9 years old, and I didn't know they existed until 2 hours ago." The silence on the other end was deafening. By late afternoon, Marcus had sent over a detailed report. Alexander sat in his penthouse apartment, the city sprawling below him through floor-to-ceiling windows, and read every word. Emma lived in Brooklyn now, in a modest brownstone in Park Slope. She worked as an art teacher at a local elementary school, not the same school the boys attended, the report noted. The twins were named Lucas and Ethan Hayes. They attended a private school on scholarship, were both on the soccer team, and Lucas played violin while Ethan was learning piano. Emma had never remarried. There was no evidence of any serious relationship in the past decade. She lived simply, well below the means that Alexander's alimony payments would have provided. In fact, according to Marcus's financial investigation, Emma had never touched a penny of the alimony. Every payment Alexander had made over the past 10 years sat untouched in a separate account. She wanted nothing from him. Not his money, not his name beyond what was legally hers, not his involvement in her life or their sons' lives. That revelation hurt more than Alexander expected. He'd told himself that Emma had left him for the money, that the divorce was about securing her financial future. It was easier to believe she was materialistic than to face the truth, that she'd left because he'd made her feel worthless, because his love had conditions and limits, while hers had been boundless and he'd squandered it. She'd taken nothing from him except her freedom and, apparently, the secret of their children. Why? That was the question that tormented him. Why hide the pregnancy? Why raise them alone when she could have demanded his support, his involvement, his fortune? Unless she believed he would fail them the same way he'd failed her, unless she thought they were better off without him. And maybe she was right. Alexander made a decision then. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen them. These were his sons, and somehow he had to find a way back into their lives. But he also knew he couldn't just show up and demand his parental rights. He'd already proven himself to be a terrible husband. He'd have to earn his place as their father. He'd have to show Emma that he'd changed, that the man who'd chosen work over love had learned what really mattered. It would be the most important negotiation of his life, and for once the stakes weren't measured in dollars. They were measured in something infinitely more valuable, the chance to be part of his children's lives, and maybe, just maybe, to win back the woman he'd never stopped loving. Sharing stories of hidden connections and second chances isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these invisible bonds, subscribe and join us on this journey. Your like can spread empathy across the world, and your comment might share a story that touches another soul searching for hope. We're building a community that believes in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Will you be part of it? Alexander spent the next 3 days learning everything he could about his sons. He watched them from a distance, parked in an unmarked car across from their school, feeling like both a concerned father and a stalker. He watched Lucas help a younger kid who'd dropped his books, saw Ethan share his lunch with a boy who'd forgotten his. They were good kids, kind kids. Emma had raised them well, and that realization filled him with both pride and shame. Pride that his sons had such beautiful hearts, shame that he'd had nothing to do with shaping them. Every morning Emma walked them to school, holding their hands even though they were probably too old for that. They didn't seem to mind. They chatted with her animatedly, all three of them laughing about something. A unit so complete that Alexander felt like an outsider looking into a world he didn't belong to. And maybe he didn't. Maybe some mistakes were too big to fix. On the fourth day, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went to see his therapist. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had helped him through the divorce, though he'd stopped going to sessions once he'd convinced himself he was fine. He wasn't fine then, and he definitely wasn't fine now. Dr. Mitchell listened as Alexander poured out everything, the shock of seeing Emma and the twins, the years of regret he'd buried under work, the desperate need to be part of their lives, mixed with the paralyzing fear that he'd destroy them, the way he'd destroyed his marriage. When he finished, Dr. Mitchell leaned back in her chair and studied him with those perceptive eyes that had always seen through his defenses. "Alexander, why didn't Emma tell you about the pregnancy?" she asked. He'd been asking himself the same question for days. "I don't know. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she wanted to punish me." Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "Or maybe she was protecting them. Think about the man you were 10 years ago. If Emma had told you she was pregnant, what would you have done?" The question hit him like a punch. He knew the answer immediately, and it made him hate his younger self. "I would have tried to control everything. I would have hired the best nannies, enrolled them in the best schools, scheduled their lives down to the minute. I would have turned fatherhood into another project to manage, another thing to optimize and perfect." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "And would you have been present? Would you have gone to their soccer games and school plays? Would you have been there for scraped knees and bad dreams?" Alexander's throat tightened. "No, I would have provided everything except what they actually needed. My time, my presence, my love." The words hung in the air between them, a confession that stripped away every excuse he'd made for himself. "So maybe," Dr. Mitchell said gently, "Emma made the hardest choice a mother can make. She chose to raise them alone, rather than let them grow up with a father who was physically present, but emotionally absent. Maybe she was protecting them from the pain she'd experienced." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan, and thought about all the nights Emma must have spent alone, pregnant and scared, wondering if she'd made the right choice. Had she hoped he'd come after her? Had she waited for him to call, to fight for their marriage, to show her that she mattered more than his empire? He'd never called, never fought. He'd let her go because it was easier than facing his own failures. And now, 10 years later, he finally understood what he'd lost. Not just a wife, not just children, but the chance to be the man he was supposed to be. The man Emma had believed he could be when she'd married him. The man those two boys deserved as a father. He made another decision then. Before he could approach Emma, before he could ask to be part of his sons' lives, he needed to become someone worthy of that privilege. He started by restructuring his entire life. He promoted his COO to CEO, moved himself to the role of chairman, and cut his work hours in half. His board thought he was having a breakdown. His competitors thought he was preparing to sell. Only David knew the truth. "You're really doing this?" his brother asked over dinner one evening. "You're stepping back from the company you built?" Alexander nodded. "I spent 10 years building an empire, David, and I ended up with nothing that mattered. I'm not making that mistake again." David looked at him with something like respect. "What if Emma won't let you see them? What if she's moved on and doesn't want you in their lives?" It was a fear that haunted Alexander every moment. "Then I'll respect her decision, but I have to try. I have to at least try to be the father they deserve." He started volunteering at a youth center in Brooklyn, not far from where Emma and the boys lived. He helped kids with homework, coached basketball, listened to their problems. At first it was awkward. He didn't know how to talk to children, didn't understand their jokes or their interests. But slowly he learned. He learned that being present mattered more than being perfect, that listening was more valuable than solving, that sometimes kids just needed someone to believe in them, to show up consistently, to care. It was everything he should have learned as a husband, everything he would need to know as a father. And for the first time in a decade, Alexander felt like he was becoming someone he could be proud of. Not because of what he'd built or how much money he'd made, but because of the small differences he was making in these kids' lives. 6 weeks after that fateful morning on Fifth Avenue, Alexander finally reached out to Emma. He didn't call or text. Instead, he wrote her a letter, an actual handwritten letter on paper, something he hadn't done since they were dating. He poured his heart onto those pages, told her everything he'd discovered about himself, everything he regretted, everything he hoped for. He didn't ask to see the boys. He didn't demand his rights as a father. He simply apologized for being the husband she deserved better than, and told her that if she ever decided he could be part of their lives, he would spend every day proving himself worthy of that gift. He mailed the letter to her Brooklyn address and then waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then a week. He heard nothing. Maybe she'd thrown it away without reading it. Maybe she'd read it and decided he didn't deserve a response. Maybe she was protecting Lucas and Ethan from the man who'd already proven he could abandon the people he loved. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Emma. We need to talk. Saturday, 2 p.m., Prospect Park, near the boathouse. Come alone." Alexander stared at those words until they blurred. This was it. This was his chance. But as relief flooded through him, so did terror. What if she was meeting him to tell him to stay away forever? What if she was angry that he'd found them? What if she'd built a life so complete that there was no room in it for him? Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and yet he dreaded it with every fiber of his being. Because in 2 days he would finally learn the truth. He would finally understand why Emma had hidden his sons from him. And he would have to face the consequences of the choices he'd made a decade ago. If you've ever felt the weight of past mistakes, or wondered if redemption is possible, stay with us. This journey is for everyone who's ever hoped for a second chance. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment sharing your own story of lost connections or found hope. And let's remind each other that it's never too late to become who we were meant to be. Your support keeps these stories alive and spreading hope to hearts that need it most. Saturday arrived with grey skies and a cold wind that cut through Alexander's coat. He arrived at Prospect Park 30 minutes early, pacing near the boathouse like a defendant waiting for a verdict. He'd rehearsed 1,000 things to say, but now, as the minutes ticked closer to 2 o'clock, every word felt inadequate. How do you apologize for a decade of absence? How do you explain to the woman you failed that you've changed when she has every reason not to believe you? At exactly 2 p.m. he saw her walking toward him. She was alone. No twins. Part of him felt relieved. This conversation needed to happen without little ears listening. Another part felt devastated. He was desperate to see them again, to hear their voices, to learn what made them laugh. Emma stopped a few feet away from him, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, though there were lines around her eyes now, marks of years spent smiling and worrying, and living a life he knew nothing about. "Hi, Alex," she said softly, and the sound of her voice saying his name nearly broke him. "Hi, Em." The old nickname slipped out before he could stop it. He saw her flinch slightly, and he cursed himself. He had no right to intimacy, no right to nicknames and familiar tones. They were strangers now, bound only by biology and broken promises. Emma gestured to a nearby bench, and they sat down, careful to maintain distance between them. The silence stretched out, heavy with 10 years of unspoken words. Finally, Emma spoke. "I read your letter. I've read it about 50 times, actually. I've cried over it, been angry about it, laughed at parts of it. I've put it away and pulled it back out, and I still don't know what to say to you." Alexander's hands trembled. He clasped them together to keep them still. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I destroyed, what I threw away, and I understand if you can never forgive me." Emma turned to look at him then, really look at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "You want to know why I never told you about the twins?" Her voice was steady, but he could hear the emotion underneath. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks before I asked for the divorce. I was terrified and excited and hopeful all at once. I thought maybe a baby would be the wake-up call you needed. Maybe it would remind you of what really mattered. I tried to tell you that night, remember? When you were in bed and I said we needed to talk. Alexander felt his chest constrict. He did remember. The call from Singapore. Emma nodded. The call from Singapore. And when you chose that call over me, when you chose it so easily, like there was no question about what was more important, I realized something devastating. If you could choose work over me, you'd choose work over our child too. And I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't watch our baby grow up feeling like they were never enough, never as important as the next deal or the next meeting. The tears were falling freely down her cheeks now. Then I went to the doctor the next week and found out I was having twins, Alex. 2 babies who would need their father's love and attention and time. And I knew you couldn't give that. You wouldn't give that. So I left before you could break their hearts the way you'd broken mine. Alexander felt tears streaming down his own face. He'd cried more in the past 6 weeks than he had in his entire adult life. I would have tried, Emma. If you'd told me, I would have tried. She smiled sadly, shaking her head. No, Alex. You would have provided. You would have given them everything money could buy. The best education, the best opportunities, the best of everything except you. And kids don't need the best of everything. They just need their parents to show up, to be present, to make them feel like they're the most important thing in the world. Could you have done that 10 years ago? Be honest with yourself. He wanted to say yes, he wanted to defend himself, to argue that he deserved a chance. But Dr. Mitchell had taught him something important, that real change starts with radical honesty. No, he admitted, his voice breaking. I couldn't have. I was so obsessed with building the company, with proving myself, with winning, that I'd forgotten how to just be, how to sit still, how to love without conditions or distractions. You were right to protect them from me. Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I've spent 10 years wondering if I made the right choice, wondering if I robbed them of their father because of my own pain, wondering if I was being selfish or protective or just scared. Every time they asked about you, every Father's Day, every school event where other kids had their dads there, I questioned myself. But then I'd remember the man you were, and I'd convince myself I'd done the right thing. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But your letter, Alex, your letter made me wonder if maybe people can change. If maybe 10 years is enough time for someone to look in the mirror and see their mistakes clearly. Is that possible? Can people really change that fundamentally? Alexander turned to face her fully. I don't know if people can change, Emma, but I know I have. Not because I wanted to impress you or win you back, though God knows I'd give anything for that chance. I changed because I finally hit bottom. I finally looked at my life and saw it for what it was, a beautiful empty shell. I had everything and nothing, success and loneliness, money and misery. And that morning when I saw you with the boys, when I saw what I'd missed, it destroyed me. It destroyed me in a way that finally made me willing to rebuild from the ground up. He pulled out his phone and showed her photos, pictures of him at the youth center, coaching kids, reading to them, just being present. I've spent the past 6 weeks learning how to be the man those boys deserve, the man you deserved 10 years ago. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Emma. I'm not even asking to see them yet. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that I could be their father. Not the biological fact, but the active choice, the daily commitment, the showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Emma stared at the photos, fresh tears flowing. They ask about you sometimes, you know. Lucas found a photo of our wedding in a box I thought I'd hidden. He wanted to know who you were, why you weren't in our lives. I told him you were a good man who loved his work very much. I never wanted them to hate you, Alex. Even after everything, I never wanted that. The words gave Alexander a flicker of hope. What did you tell them about why we divorced? Emma looked out at the lake, watching ducks glide across the grey water. I told them sometimes people love each other, but want different things from life. I told them you wanted to build companies and change the world, and I wanted a quieter life, focused on family. I told them neither choice was wrong, just different. And I told them that maybe someday when they were older they could decide if they wanted to know you. Alexander's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. And now, what do you think now? Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think I need time to process all of this. I think I need to talk to a therapist and maybe a lawyer about how this would even work. I think I need to prepare the boys carefully because this will turn their world upside down. But Alex, I also think that every child deserves to know their father, if that father is willing to put in the work. And your letter, these photos, everything you've told me today, it makes me think you might actually be willing. She stood up, and Alexander stood with her. I'm not promising anything. I'm not saying this will be easy or that it will even work, but I'm willing to consider it. For Lucas and Ethan, they deserve that chance. Alexander felt something break open in his chest, hope mixed with terror, mixed with gratitude so profound he could barely speak. Thank you, Emma, thank you. I won't let you down, I won't let them down, I swear. Emma smiled, a real smile this time, though sadness still lingered in her eyes. Don't swear, Alex, just show up. That's all anyone really needs. Someone who shows up. She walked a few steps away, then turned back. I'll call you next week. We'll talk about next steps, about how to introduce you to them, about boundaries and expectations. This is going to be complicated and messy and probably painful for everyone involved. Are you sure you're ready for that? Alexander nodded, more certain than he'd been about anything in his life. I'm ready. I've spent 10 years running from pain and missing everything beautiful because of it. I'm done running. As Emma walked away, disappearing into the grey afternoon, Alexander sat back down on the bench. He thought about his sons, about Lucas who helped younger kids and Ethan who shared his lunch. He thought about all the moments he'd missed and all the moments that might still be possible. He thought about how the measure of a man isn't in what he builds, but in who he loves, how he loves them, and whether he's brave enough to keep loving even when it's hard. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. He'd have to earn every moment with his sons, prove himself worthy of Emma's trust, and face the man he'd been with honesty and humility. But for the first time in a decade, Alexander Hayes felt like he was walking towards something real, something that mattered, something worth more than all the billions in his bank account. He was walking toward redemption, toward family, toward the person he was always meant to be. And this time, he wouldn't let anything stand in his way. Not work, not fear, not even his own doubt. Because some opportunities only come once in a lifetime, and he'd already wasted his first chance. This second chance, this impossible gift Emma was considering giving him, would be different. It had to be. This was the journey of one soul learning that success means nothing without love, that empathy connects us all, and that it's never too late to become who we were meant to be. If you've ever felt the pain of lost connections or the hope of redemption, join our community. Subscribe to this channel and share your story in the comments. Maybe your words will heal someone who desperately needs to hear them. Together, we celebrate the bonds that unite us, the courage to change, and the power of second chances. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing that love can transform even the most broken among us.